Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. The French president and New Zealand Prime Minister are hosting a summit on online extremism in the wake of the terror attacks that took place in Christchurch against the mosques there. They are seeking to curb online extremism, especially the use of live streaming, such as that was used by the terrorist in New Zealand during his attacks in Christchurch. The United States, though, has said it cannot sign on to the Christchurch call as this policy is being called, saying that there are concerns about free speech when it comes to this. Let's now watch a short report about this issue, and we'll get to our guests after that.
Emmanuel Macron and New Zealand's Premier Jacinda Ardern are hosting a summit in Paris to launch an ambitious initiative to eliminate online extremism. It takes place against a growing awareness of extremist content and activity on social media. The new initiative, known as the Christchurch Call, is being advocated by Prime Minister Ardern after a white supremacist gunned down 51 Muslims in a massacre at 2 mosques in her country. The Christchurch attacker broadcast live footage on Facebook from a head-mounted camera. The Christchurch Call initiative has been signed by leading tech giants and world leaders. The pledge made by 17 government and tech companies includes a range of commitments to fight the spread of extremist content online. The United States did not sign on the agreement, but it endorsed the goals of the call. It is believed to be the first agreement signed between tech companies and the governments at this level.
All right, well, our panelists who are joining us to start off this discussion are Serge, who is the Director of Operations for Europe and the Middle East North Africa region at the Institute for Economics and Peace. He's joining us now from Belfast. We're also joined by Vasco the Cruz Amador, who is the founder and CEO of Global Intelligence Insight, which is a London-based cyber intelligence project. He's joining us now from Lisbon. Vasco and Serge, thank you both for joining us. Serge, I'd like to start with you, if I may. What do you make of the importance of such a conference as that called for by the French President, I should say, and New Zealand Prime Minister, as well as this effort by the French President for tech companies to get into more common good?
But this is not the first time this is happening. I remember that about 3 to 4 years ago, a couple of policemen were killed online also on Facebook Live, just a couple of days after Facebook Live came online. So I would say this is a reaction to what is happening online, what terrorist groups are doing online on a daily basis.
And Vasco, this is coming quite, hasn't it? Because the online platforms have been misused for a significant amount of time now, haven't they?
If we will analyze this, it's something that we are checking this for the time of 2014, for instance, when jihadist groups, mostly ISIS, started to use social media platforms. But the topic is much more complex and sensitive because if we will deal with social media apps or social media platforms, in fact, they are using it, but the topic is much more complex because they are using invitation-only channels, deep dark web forums since the time of 2007, 2008. And it's much more complex because when we are dealing with this, we need to understand their ideology at the back of it. And then at the same time, we need to cover linguistic aspects, which is the main issue here. Because if we will focus only with the social media platforms, this will go straight to Twitter, Facebook, and other like YouTube. But we have a huge amount of platforms that they are using, which are totally encrypted, and they are spreading the message in the way that they want to do so. So it's something like we need to understand much more and with a deeper complexity rather than only thinking about the social media aspect of it.
And that's a good point. Serge, I wonder what you make of that, because we can talk about platforms such as Telegram, for example, which have secret chat options which would destroy themselves within a certain amount of time. Do you think that there is a whole world out there of encrypted discussions, as Vasco there said, which are being overlooked?
Well, I think that when we talk about the internet, we talk about the 1% that everybody is using, the other 99%, the dark web. This is where all those discussions are taking place. And of course, you have the encryption that is possible, but you have much more technology that even makes it impossible for the tech giants to really investigate what's going on the internet. So that's for sure. That's what they use. So recruitment, financing, organizations, command and control, radicalization. This is all done on the internet, on the internet already, in this dark web, in the part of the internet that I would say a usual person do not have access to.
So then, Vasco, I wonder then, how does one balance the concerns for privacy, human rights, etc., freedom of expression, as well as then controlling extremist content, be it even white supremacist or white nationalist in nature?
Well, here it's we need to analyze this as we are analyzing open source intelligence platforms. Okay, yep. So when we are thinking about invitation-only channels and deep dark web forums, it's something like yourself or anyone can use. So we know that in Europe we have the new laws in regards to GDPR, for instance, but at the same time, we need to think about exactly how we are going to focus and to monitor within open source intelligence platforms like deep dark web, invitation-only channels, and everything that they are speaking in this regard. It's a huge topic and a hard topic. Even within government agencies, they are split because half of them think that it's totally important for us to cover and to monitor across the open source intelligence platforms. And then at the same time, we have all the other half that think that we need to block, we need to stop, because we need to block them and to suspend them for their activity. But in fact, the biggest issue here is the internet as a whole is being used as the biggest tool against everyone. And even when we are thinking about jihadists or right-wing extremists with this one. But at the same time, we need to think about this. We will monitor only what you are speaking rather than going through your system, computer, laptop, or similar.
And Serge, is it who gets to decide what one is saying is extremist or not? I imagine that should be a huge concern here as well, shouldn't it?
Well, this is really at the heart of the discussion that is going on. You have on one side the governments that would, like with the security and intelligence services, regulate as much as possible those internet platforms and the internet as such. And on the other side, you have the tech companies that really refrain from having a lot of regulations on this platform. As Vasco has said before, it's all happening online, and especially when you look at Daesh today, that has really been crushed as an organization. This is a type of organization that is not going to look for very low input, achieving very high. The internet is really the best place to do so. So I guess having a summit like the summit in Paris is really finding a middle ground where the tech companies that consider themselves being first responders would meet the aspirations of the government.
Indeed. Okay, Serge and Vasco, we will leave it there at that with both of you. Thank you for starting off this discussion for us here in Scope. Viewers will be back after a short break with two new guests to continue this discussion on this important topic. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope, and we're still discussing that online extremism conference called for by the French president and New Zealand Prime Minister, as well as the Christchurch call, as the initiative is being called, which many tech companies as well as countries are now beginning to sign on to, except, of course, the United States. To take this conversation a bit forward, we're now joined by Ayman, Mhanna, who is the Executive Director of the Samir Kassir Foundation, one of the leading freedom of expression and media development organizations in the Middle East. He's joining us now from Beirut. We're also joined by Michele Groppi, who is a PhD in Defense Studies at King's College London and is currently a teaching fellow at the Defense Academy of the United Kingdom in Challenges to the International Order. He's joining us now from Verona in Italy. Michele and Ayman, thanks for joining us. Ayman, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of this conference? Are its goals reasonable? And secondly, will this curb online extremism?
There is a global trend, and it's a welcome trend, to tackle the issue of freedom of expression online. Whether this initiative, the other Democracy and Information Initiative that France led, but also the UK and Canada initiative. When it comes to the Christchurch call in particular, there is definitely a need to regulate what is communicated online. However, the process that led to the call, which excluded civil society organizations, excluded academia, and was only negotiated between tech firms and governments, leaves several points a little bit open-ended in terms of definition of terms, which leaves it open for some governments to give their own definitions of very controversial expressions, such as terrorism, extremism, which opens the door for governments in our region, in Central Asia, but also in Africa, to interpret the call in a way that serves their direct interest, instead of only looking at the very good intentions behind the call.
I wonder what you make of that, Michele. It is concerning, isn't it, when a tech company and when a government by themselves sit down at the table and decide what is or is not extremist content and the limits, essentially, of freedom of expression online?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The main thing is that, unfortunately, there's absolutely no shared definition about extremism in general and radicalization, terrorism, and therefore, I totally agree. Unfortunately, we're always going to have this problem. Like, where do we stop when we notice that something wrong is actually happening online? So it's all about the democratic dilemma, right? So freedom of expression, again, versus the fundamental freedoms and security, right? So I do applaud the attempt by the French government to actually sit down and try to make more sense of it. But at the same time, we need a much more holistic, exhaustive effort, interdisciplinary, bringing in members of the academia and the civil society also to just make sure that we are on the same page, given that, like, definitionally speaking, unfortunately, we don't really know where we're going, right? And therefore, and we've seen that already with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So we need clearer rules and we need a clear shared agenda, which is obviously going to be a challenge, but we have to start from somewhere. So again, I do applaud the attempt, but, you know, hopefully we will have other opportunities to actually sit down with tech companies and people from the government and actually discuss what's actually going on, both in terms of right-wing extremism and
Ayman, I wonder what you make of who decide what is extremist content or not, because, you know, it can be argued, if I may use one example, Palestinian activists, sometimes a lot of their accounts get disabled, be it Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, for posting pro-Palestine content, and other such content as well gets you know, disabled and or blocked or banned online. Who decides this, and is the system that we have in place right now to who decides all of the above correct, do you think?
You're pointing to one of the core problems. As long as we look at the decision-making from a regulation perspective, it means that we're looking at it from a top-down perspective. We are calling to move towards a governance perspective, which is by definition multi-stakeholder. You gave an example. I'll give you other very simple examples. When it comes to communication by the Islamic State or Daesh, research conducted by top scholars such as Javier Lesaca and others showed that only 85% of the videos they produce are against the community rules of Facebook, YouTube, and others. Whereas, only 15% are against the rules. 85% only show stories, for example, at what happens to the Rohingya minority in Burma. So it's the narrative rather than images that are gruesome. The same applies, for example, to many supporters of Daesh, specifically women, using an avatar or the picture of lioness on their profile pictures. Can Twitter decide that every person who has a lion or a lioness as a profile picture is an extremist and has to be banned from Twitter? These are really fine lines that require the input from people who really know their topic, and absolutely not leave it to algorithms. decision-making by algorithms on these issues can lead to very problematic outcomes.
Indeed, and I'll give my own example, Michele. I used to have a Twitter account. I've had 2 Twitter accounts, and Twitter keeps banning me because I was based in Tehran for many years, saying that, it was an Iran-connected account. So, what does that mean then when you have such generalizations and swooping bans on all accounts, for example, from a certain country, or if you were part of Iranian media, all Iranian media accounts just banned overnight? What do you make of such swooping bans?
Well, first of all, I'm actually very sorry to hear that about your account. Obviously, it's such a shame. The point being, look, as the colleague was saying, we cannot afford to have big generalizations. They are detrimental because, unfortunately, extremism, radicalization, even terrorism, they are something very intimate. And therefore, we need people, as the colleague was saying, who do know their topic and make ad hoc decisions. Banning people just on the basis of where they're from, who they might be related to, is actually playing into the hands of extremists and radicals and whatsoever. However, there's one big problem, is that unfortunately we are lacking the people to do so, right? During some of my conversations with security agents, this was actually one of the biggest problems. Like, tech companies will not cooperate with you, they will not share data with you, and on top of that, we don't have enough people who, one, know their subject, and two, can actually afford to sit down and take a look at everything and then decide in a very calm manner whether or not the content is okay or not. So again, more knowledge, more people, but definitely no generalizations.
Yeah, so Ayman, then is this a question of everybody just trying to overcome this very vast and complex issue, as you had correctly put it as well, just quickly, and just trying to put it on the back burner so they can move on from it? Because, there's so many aspects to this, right, about freedom of speech, and even Facebook, for example, choosing certain articles that a person may post online to then underneath it say clarifications, or a clarification that may be a clarification in Facebook's opinion but not in somebody else's opinion. Do you think that we do not have enough experts, as Michele said, or is this just a question of we're just not that bothered?
It's a question of silos, unfortunately. Experts do exist, but then companies operate in a different environment, in a different bubble. Same for government, same for academia. Even civil society and academia don't speak with each other as often as they should. So it's about finding the right platforms for exchanging the different pieces of the puzzle that are needed. And I do not want to doubt the intentions of President Macron or the Prime Minister of New Zealand. The issue is that, unfortunately, they are bound by electoral cycles. They need to show their constituencies that they are tackling real problems. But because of the urgency that political leaders face, they may not give themselves the right time to go through this multi-stakeholder approach to define the right policies. But at the same time, there is a risk of redundancy. There have been so many events, so many conferences and declarations, including through UN agencies, meetings, in order to define some terms, in order to give guidance, recommendations. Unfortunately, the sense of urgency is not allowing governments to look back into available research, available literature to take the right decision. So taking a step back and not acting based on the latest attack, but rather on how to prevent further attacks and how to tackle the root causes needs some pause, but at the same time, there is enough room. There are, as I mentioned, really good initiatives. The Reporters Without Borders Information and Communication Declaration, the UK-Canada Initiative on Freedom of Speech and Freedom of Journalism will create so many opportunities and conferences in the next year to have excellent multi-stakeholder conversation about these things, and good things can come out of it. So let's take the Christchurch call with its good intention by recognizing its loopholes and make sure we all contribute to filling the gaps.
Okay, so we just have a left, Michele. I'm going to give you the final word. Do you think all of the above makes all of us any safer, really, from extremist content online?
Actually, there is a very good question. On one side, absolutely, because obviously something like it's just a matter of numbers, right? So less words online might equal to more security. However, again, it could definitely backfire. So we have to be extremely careful to what we wish for, because again, if we apply many generalizations, if we let algorithms decide what's okay and what's not, again, it could backfire. It could definitely play into the hands of extremists, whichever way they come from, right? So I mean, like right, left, or jihadist or whatever. So I mean, the bottom line is that we have to be very cautious, and we need a much more interdisciplinary effort, which actually gives a way like big, like constructive and informed debate. That's the bottom line.
Very well. We'll leave that, but of course we appreciate both your time, your insight and analysis. That was Michele Groppi, who is a PhD in Defence Studies at King's College London. He was speaking to us from Verona in Italy. And we were also joined by Ayman Mhanna from Beirut. He's Executive Director of the Samir and Kassir Foundation, which is a leading freedom of expression and media development organization in the Middle East. We appreciate both of your time. As Ayman and Michele, they're mentioned viewers, as well as Vasco and Serge earlier as well, there are many facets to this discussion which are not being spoken about enough. That this is content that is just being posted online publicly, that is. But what of those chats which are encrypted? What of the other platforms, apart from these larger tech companies, part of the dark web, quote unquote, that is being used in such cases? And then secondly, there is this question of freedom of expression. The U.S. Intentions may not be along the lines of what we're talking about, but certainly freedom of expression is at stake online. Are we still going to be able to have democratic, open discussions online? Or are Palestinian activists, for example, going to continue being blocked and banned online? Or all accounts, Twitter accounts, for example, connected to Iran, are they going to be blocked if they are part of the media or political sphere, etc.? So there are a lot of concerns here, but certainly no one is downplaying the importance of approaching this issue of online extremism in some fashion. No one is just sure that the French president and New Zealand prime minister's approach will be one that will necessarily work to make us all safer online from such content. We'll keep a close eye on that here in Scope, but I'll be back after a short break with our next segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. We're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. Now, the UK general, the top UK general, mind you, who is part of the US-led coalition against ISIS, or Daesh, as it is known as well, has said that there is no increased threat from Iranian-backed forces either in Iraq or Syria, and that is a direct contradiction of the U.S.'s entire reason to build up forces in this region. The U.S. Central Command coming out against what the UK general said, rebuking him publicly, saying that they are on high alert due to what is perceived to be an Iranian threat. What is behind these conflicting versions of the reality on the ground, and is Iran and or its proxies, quote unquote, a real threat to the U.S. and the West as a whole? To discuss all of that a bit further, we're now joined by our esteemed panelists. Firstly, we're joined by Zenonas, who is a researcher at the Peace Research Institute Oslo, known as PRIO. He is part of their Cyprus Center. He is joining us now from Nicosia in Cyprus via Skype. We're also joined by Hadi Wahab, who is a doctoral researcher and postgraduate teacher assistant at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. His topic of research is Hezbollah, a regional armed non-state actor. He's joining us now from Exeter via Skype. And we're also joined finally by Giuliano Bifolchi, who is with the Intelligence Unit Director at Association of Studies, Research and Internationalization in Eurasia and Africa, known as ASRIE. He is joining us now from the Italian capital, Rome. Giuliano, Hadi, and Zenonas, thank you all for joining us. Zenonas, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of these conflicting statements coming out of top Western generals?
Let me start by saying that the U.S. seems to be trying to manage the damage that itself brought about over the past decade or so, maybe 15 years since the beginning of the Iraq War in 2003. It essentially created huge power vacuums in the area that allowed Iran to fill those vacuums and increase its influence over the region, from Syria and Iraq Lebanon and, of course, Hamas and Yemen and so on. So what they're trying to do now is limit that influence and power that Iran managed to gain. However, these statements coming from the British general in Iraq show that there are some cracks in, I would say, in the Western alliance as far as the Iranian threat is concerned, and that the rest of the partners, the Western partners, not least the P5+1 partners that were part of the nuclear agreement with Iran, do not want to see an escalation and would rather to follow the diplomatic route to solving this problem and basically reinforce the agreement rather than see it collapse entirely.
Hadi, what do you make of it? Do you think that this quote-unquote Iranian threat is being overstated?
Look, first I have to say that whether what General Rika said is true or not, it's a good thing that he said it, because this kind of de-escalates the situation. That's first. Second, I partially agree with what he said, because even though they're prepared or not, or now they are getting prepared, they're like last year, Reuters reported that backed Iranian forces in Iraq received ballistic missiles from Iran. So this is not new. But look, Hezbollah went from Lebanon to Syria to fight for the interest of the whole axis. Iraqi militias came from Afghanistan and they came from Iraq to fight in Syria. So whoever came into Syria to fight for the axis and for its interests, they're definitely gonna fight for Iran if something happened. So let's hope this doesn't happen, and I doubt that something is gonna happen because even Trump doesn't want that. And the Iranians, like yesterday, Jawad Zarif said that Iran's foreign minister said that they don't want a war, and Khamenei said that there's gonna be no war. So both of them don't want war. But Iran's expansion in the region and its influence are increasing. That's sure. I would agree on that. But it's not now. It's not recent. It's not new. It's like since 2003 and since 1990, since 1982 in Lebanon. It's not recent. But yes, they're trying to prevent further expansion.
Okay, so Giuliano, I wonder what you make of that. Do you think that division amongst allies is, as Zenonas there said, down to the fact that the other members of the nuclear deal agreement want to preserve it, especially the Europeans, for example?
Well, it is clear that the European side, the European countries would like to preserve the deal, the nuclear deal, and the words of the British officer, British generals, they are clear. They are clear that, and they are against the USA statements. So, according to my opinion, I believe that the European countries are more interested in preserving the Iranian nuclear deal than going to another conflict in the Middle Eastern region, because also they understood that another conflict will make the conditions to a new radicalization process, and also will help organization like jihadist organization to take advantage of the situation.
Zenonas, I wonder what you make of what many are saying is a march to war. Many people comparing what's happening right now with possibly the march to the war in Iraq back in George W. Bush's days. Not obviously an exact parallel, but if you have an aircraft carrier group, B-52 bombers, Patriot defense missiles, amphibious transport docks being deployed to the Middle East, as well as the U.S. Embassy in Iraq ordering non-essential, non-emergency government staff to immediately leave, and then talk about 120,000 troops possibly coming to the Middle East, all of that really sounds like a march to war, doesn't it, Zenonas?
Yes, it does, and definitely this environment that this discussion is creating is not helpful at all, and it's prone to accidents and miscalculations that could actually lead to conflict and confrontation. And to be honest, the military forces that are being deployed there from the Americans for now don't seem to aiming for a full-scale intervention or invasion. Actually, what they could do is maybe conduct some surgical strikes in nuclear sites or ballistic missile sites. What they mostly want to do is send a signal to Iran that they are there, they have the capacity and the capability and the willingness to retaliate in case Iran tries to do anything or hit or inflict harm on any Western interest in the area, be that in Saudi Arabia or Iraq or the UAE and so on. So I don't think, and I agree with the previous colleagues that talked, that no one really wants a full-scale confrontation right now.
But then, Hadi, if in the hypothetical situation, as Zenonas there said, there were to be even surgical strikes on any Iranian sites within Iran's borders, would the Iranians, and how do you think, and let me put it this way, Hadi, how do you think the Iranians would react? Would that essentially just be the beginning of a proper war?
If that happens, I doubt that. Let me agree that any miscalculation might lead to a war. But comparing Iran, the situation now in Iran, to the pre-2003 Iraq invasion, I find it misleading for so many reasons. Because first, back then, Iraq had problems with all its neighbors. Iran, Syria, they invaded Kuwait before. Then another thing is that Iran now has more than 520,000 military personnel, and they have 250,000 reserve, which exceeds Iraq by way more. And then the location of Iran is different. Don't forget that you have American targets in Afghanistan, you have American targets in Iraq, and we're forgetting Israel. So the messages that the Iranians sent, I think, started in Gaza 10 days, 2 weeks before, because it was initiated by the Islamic Jihad there. Okay, we all agree that the Palestinian cause is righteous, but it was a clear message from the Iranian. It started back there. It didn't start now. And now this escalated. And don't forget that Iran has international allies, such as Russia and China. And Iran now is very different. It has extensions from Tehran to Beirut to the Houthis in Yemen. They can close both the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Aden. And it has bigger population. It's 3 times more than Iraq. I don't find it. I can't compare it to that moment. And in addition to this, Trump denied sending what the New York Times said, that they're preparing 120,000 troops to send to Iraq, and they accused the New York Times of lying. So I don't think it's the same situation.
Okay, so Giuliano, at this point we have extreme sanctions in place on the Iranian public. The economic situation within Iran gets worse literally on a daily basis, with inflation jumping drastically. So many people would argue, Giuliano, that if there were to be an attack on Iran, this would be a fairly good time from the U.S. point of view, considering the Iranian economy is weakened significantly. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, we should say that also Rouhani say that if there will be a confrontation, a war, this kind of war will be worse than the war during the 80s with Iraq, because in this case, the Iranian economy will be targeted and Iran will face economic crisis. But let me express my opinion that I believe this kind of, what we are experiencing now is a kind of psychological warfare. It's like the United States, they are trying to test not only the regional balances, but also some foreign actors like Russia and China. And so they're trying to test it because we should also take into account the fact that Russia is investing in energy sector, particularly the oil sector in the north, and recently the energy ministry of Iraq invited Russia to be also involved in the south, and also China. So this is kind of, according to me, is we are at the level of psychological warfare, and the United States, they are trying test not only Iran, but also its potential allies, and to see what is the reaction. Also because I can agree with my previous colleagues that probably if we see the military forces that the United States they wanted to deploy, that are military forces useful only to specific target attack on some specific objectives. So of course Iran will face an economic crisis and hard situation, and this can be a good opportunity for the United States. But then the United States should be also aware that the situation in the entire Middle East, entire region, will change and can create also opportunities for different actors.
Okay, so Zenonas, Giuliano there brought up the term psychological warfare, because that's something that, in fact, even Iranian officials have used as a term when it comes to this current situation and this seeming build-up against Iran in the region. Do you agree with that? Do you think this is all just psychological warfare?
It has that aspect as well, but it's not just that, because there are significant material aspects to the whole thing. And we're talking about, you know, the US imposing sanctions on Iran, increasing the sanctions actually, and bringing a country that is already in a difficult economic situation to an even more difficult situation. And that creates problems domestically for Iran as well, and might also hinder political stability at some point and social cohesion. So for Iran, this is very important, and that's why they are reacting as well. One reason is this, and the other reason is that because of these sanctions, they might end up being the only state in the Persian Gulf that are not able to export effectively oil. So this has a number of ramifications. So on the one hand, yes, we have the psychological warfare. That doesn't mean it will lead to an actual war. But on the other hand, Iran is under attack in so many other ways.
Hadi, do you agree with that? Do you think this is a warfare of another kind, but using, be it the economy or otherwise? Because certainly it can be argued, Hadi, that a much weakened Iran it would, if not immediately, but in the future, be a lot easier to attack.
I guess this is an underestimation for Iran. First, I guess that Trump's foreign policy is rudderless, but I see that he's using the same foreign policy that Kissinger used. It's like we want to sit on the table, and we want to hold a stick in our hand. This wouldn't work for Iran. They can't go and dictate Iran what to do. It's not how it works. So yes, they are using psychological ways to do that, but they're choking Iran, and I doubt that Iran is going to sit and watch them do that. And it's obvious by what happened in Al Fujairah and what happened in Saudi Arabia. And like now, in 13 minutes ago, Adel Jubair of Saudi Arabia and Khalid bin Salman both accused Iranians of giving orders to the Houthis to attack them. There are a lot of interests for the Gulf countries in the region. They can't escalate. And even the UAE doesn't want that. Yesterday, they asked for a de-escalation in the region and for a good situation.
Yeah.
I doubt that there's gonna be a war, and it's unlikely to happen. It's gonna be damaging for everyone. We have Israel, and we have the interests in the Gulf. We have 20% of the oil passing from that region. This is gonna increase the oil prices. It's gonna lead to targeting all the interests of everyone in the region. I think both doesn't want that. And Trump also, he's not a man of war. I don't think he is. And yesterday, after all this tension, he said again that I'm sure that Iran will talk to us. And this is going to be, I guess, through or Qatar or Iraq, because 3 days ago, yesterday, Al Jazeera revealed that 3 days ago, the Qatari foreign minister was in Tehran. And when Pompeo canceled his visit to Germany and he went to Iraq, the BBC said that he transferred a message to the Iranians through the Iraqi prime minister. So I don't think neither of them wants a war.
Very well. We'll leave that as our final word. First, that was a good point to end on about possible mediation. Let me thank all of our guests. There was Hadi Wahab, doctoral researcher and postgraduate teacher assistant at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. He was speaking to us from Exeter itself. We were also joined by Zenonas, Tziarras, who is a researcher at Peace Research Institute Oslo's Cyprus Center. He was speaking to us from Nicosia. And we were also joined on the line by Giuliano Bifolchi, who is Intelligence Unit Director at Association of Studies at Research and Internationalization in Eurasia and Africa. He was speaking to us from the Italian capital. And now, viewers, as Hadi there ended off, that was a good point to end on, and that about mediation efforts, and a number of countries' names have been thrown out there. Qatar is the one that is being spoken about the most as possibly being able to de-escalate the growing tensions in this region between the United States and Iran. Qatar has put itself forward to try to play such a role. Will it be successful or not? We do not know at this point. But certainly the UK general statement and the rebuke that brought about, the very public rebuke by the US Central Command, is a sign that not everybody in the West agrees upon this perceived Iranian threat to U.S. and Western interests in the Middle East. We're going to wait and see how this all plays out as the U.S. seems to carry out a military buildup in this region, and of course how Iran may react going forward in the coming days as well. That's all for Scope for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.